welcome to you, viewers, listeners. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the podcast, Evidently You're Unaware. I am your host, Andrea, also known as the Successful Diva, and I am so glad that you have made the decision to join me here again to become more aware on some issue, some topic, some person, some whatever's happening that can bring light or actually provide more insight into what might be happening so that you can make better decisions. I can make better decisions. And when we're informed, I believe that we have the opportunity to do better than we would have done had we not known. So let's talk about things that we need to learn. As children, we grow up and we do certain things, we learn from them. Adults, doesn't matter. We should actually learn from things that might transpire or decisions that we made that maybe weren't the best. We should learn from them. But today, I want to talk about a cycle that we've seen here in our United States of America. And I'm going to reference a prior episode as well, because some of the things that I'm going to share, you might have seen on another episode, but I'm going to dig a little bit deeper so that we all understand how repetitive this is. And hopefully this go around, we will have learned the lesson. The primary purpose of the U.S. military is to defend national interests, security, and the Constitution against foreign and domestic threats, ensuring the nation's safety and prosperity. It maintains armed forces to deter war. I should say that word properly. Deter. To deter war. Fight and win conflicts. We should always, as people, and in particular, since I'm talking about the military, we protect our economic interests and provide humanitarian aid. That's what our military, in some part, has been known for until recently. There's well-documented evidence that we have engaged in a cycle of wars and global conflict, but depending on which party's leader is in the White House and controls Congress, that pattern many are not aware of. And if you're not paying attention, you just may think it's just an ebb and flow of things. And, that's just how it goes. And that's the way it should be. And I'm here to make you more aware that no, it should not be that way, but it seems to be that way. And there is a cycle to it. And I'm going to break that cycle down for you on this episode. So let's get smarter. Here we are. This cycle I've talked about. This is the cycle I've talked about on a previous episode, but I want to recap it here. The economy in this cycle collapses under a Republican president. America, after going through such turmoil and hassle and whatever, they elect a Democratic president who sets the country on a path to recovery. That economic recovery is slow, and most times it will be, because you just can't snap your finger and bring things back that have deteriorated over time. And so it's a little uneven, and America gets a little impatient, and then they go back and elect a Republican president. For whatever those promises may sound like, they quickly forget. People quickly forget what just happened, usually just 1 4-year cycle before. What happens in the cycle is Republicans will come in and institute their economic agenda, which usually causes the economy to collapse once again. This is the cycle. There is proven documented global conflict and economic data proving this cycle. So I'm going to talk about the cycle with names of presidents. So here they are. They just appeared on your screen. So let's just start with just recently, because I'm young enough to remember when George H.W. Bush was in office, Bush 41. You could also call him Bush 1 because there were 2 of them. And we didn't learn from Bush 1, so we brought in another Bush. But here we are. Bush 1, George H.W., president number 41, the economy collapsed, and he served 1 term, having previously been Ronald Reagan's VP. But his term, 89 to 93, was marred by the Persian Gulf War, and that was followed by Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. There also was some bombing campaigns. One we all probably can remember, Operation Desert Storm. The economy under President George H.W. Bush was characterized by a mild recession, rising employment, and a growing federal deficit, which led to a sluggish recovery. Then came America said, enough is enough. We're going to elect a Democratic president. Sets the country on a path to recovery. That Democratic president was Bill Clinton, 1993 to 2001, our 42nd president. Although there were several military conflicts and interventions during Bill's term, there were zero wars, zero wars. And the economy, I want to say this probably twice so that you hear me good. The economy during Bill Clinton's term administration experienced the longest economic expansion in U.S. history. The economy during President number 42 experienced the longest economic expansion in U.S. history, characterized by rapid job creation, low unemployment, and a shift from record deficits to record budget surpluses. And I do recall, I will say from a personal aspect, I do recall talking about the Clinton administration that had us in the black versus in the red. And for those of us who are budgeting and, numbers, people, statistically driven, analytically driven, we look at cash flows and profit and loss, all of that. We understand when you're in the black, things are good. When you're in the red, things are not. And Bill Clinton had us there. But guess what happened? Even in that time, and even though things were good, George W. Bush became the 43rd president. Bill Clinton ended up, I guess, it was too good. I don't know what it was, but we didn't learn from Bush number one. And then we came in and brought in another Bush, George W. Bush, also known as Bush II. He became the 43rd president. And that instituted his economic and his administration's economic agenda. He served 2 terms, and over the course of those terms, the U.S. endured 2 major wars. We went from 0 wars to 2 wars. 2 wars initiated in response to the September 11th, 2001 attacks. That's the war in Afghanistan, which began in 2001, and then the Iraq war, which began in 2003. Both conflicts continued throughout his entire 2 terms in office. Both of those conflicts were his entire 2 terms. And although, we saw some growth, by the time he was heading out, there was some growth starting to matriculate, but his term ended with significant federal deficit spending, a housing bust, and widespread bank failure. So we went from being in the black, Bill Clinton, to federal deficit spending, George W. Bush. So let's talk about it. The cycle continues. George W. Bush is now in office, 43. Economy collapses under Republican president. We're back at the top of the cycle. And then we go, okay, enough's enough. And history was made. President Barack Obama, number 44, the only U.S. president to serve 2 complete terms with the nation, and basically inheriting these 2 wars, Iraq and Afghanistan. The Iraq war ended in 2011, and although Afghanistan had not officially ended, Obama officially ended U.S.-led combat mission in Afghanistan in 2014. And so by the time he was he was in his 2nd term, but 2014, there was a significant reduction in troops in Afghanistan. The economy under President Barack Obama, 2009 to 17, was characterized by a long, steady recovery from the Great Recession, transitioning from a severe contraction to a consistent job growth and low inflation. Obama inherited, and some people miss this, but you need to know that he inherited from Bush II the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, and the economy was losing nearly 800,000 jobs per month when he took office in January 2009. But nope. Essentially, that was not good enough. And so, following the nation's first Black president could have been the nation's first female president, but nope. Hillary Clinton didn't get her shot. And then we move into this gentleman, and I just labeled him as the felon because that's what he is. He's a 34 count convicted felon. And so we go into administration number one, felon taking the 45th presidential slot. And he inherited from then Barack Obama a strong, stable, growing economy, which was in its 10th year of economic expansion. Over his first term, the now 34 count convicted felon reduced federal taxes and increased federal spending, both of which significantly increased federal budget deficits and the national debt, kind of what he's doing today. But at that time, it wasn't, I guess, as bad. If we want to find the silver lining, the national debt wasn't as bad during that time. And I remember that in that first term, there were still, like the lies that we hear today, they were existent in that first term, but they were masked more by like showmanship and that reality TV feel. And due to basically his inability to govern, the United States entered in what historians now categorize as one of the top 7 worst pandemics ever. That was COVID-19. And so we're at the top of the screen, President 45, the felon. Well, we get enough of that, and then we elect a Democratic president. You follow the cycle? I hope you all are following me here. This is the cycle. It has been documented, and this is what has happened. America then elected a Democratic president who sets the path on recovery. We all know Uncle Joe walked into a COVID-ridden country, really a COVID-ridden world, and number 46 basically experienced his administration, the Biden-Harris administration, experienced a rapid post-pandemic recovery characterized by strong job growth, over 16 million jobs added, largely recovering from the COVID-19 shutdown, but nonetheless added jobs, which literally dropped the unemployment rate to 4% by January 2022. However, being fair, the period of Joe Biden's administration was marked by high inflation, which led to higher prices and higher interest rates as the Fed moved to stabilize the economy. And so, we're all just outside of that mark where not only was Joe Biden's age an issue, the Republicans ran on the economy. And it's almost like we just forgot we had the felon just a term before who had run up the national debt, and our economy was tanking and had tanked again, literally tanked and collapsed. But age was a focus, and it caused voters to become concerned about Joe leading the nation for another term. And reportedly, I think Joe was pressured to drop out of the re-election bid. It is what it is. There's so many different, avenues out there about that, but he was reported to drop out of the re-election bid, and the rest is history. So we need not, talk about it. The rest really is history. And ultimately, the country had two opportunities, within the past 8 years to break that cycle. They had two opportunities, literally, to break the cycle of unnecessary wars, roll back those understood rights that we've all, I think, taken for granted. We could have broken that cycle had we just looked at how do we keep building with what is typically good. And I think ultimately people look at what someone's doing, or they look at one aspect. And certainly I'm not saying, and you've heard me say this, if you followed me long enough, I've said this on this platform, no administration is perfect because the people within them are not perfect. But we did have two opportunities. We had the opportunity to elect Hillary Clinton before we got the felon at 45. And then after Barack Obama, we had the opportunity to elect Kamala Harris. After Barack Obama and Kamala, after Joe Biden, after Joe Biden, we had the opportunity to elect Kamala Harris. And so 2 opportunities went by. Yes, they're female, but either way, we could have kept Democratic leadership in place twice within the last 8 years. The cycle could have been broken. When will we learn? When will we learn? When will we learn? Has the 34 count convicted felon enacted on enough of his worst impulses? Has he engaged in enough criminal behavior? Has he placed enough economic, social, and financial strain on voters? What will it take for us to not just simply bring in and probably usher in another Democratic president, but when will we hang tight right there for maybe 2 full 8-year terms? There's a thought where we get stability. But is power that much of a forefront that people cannot, for the life of the sake of the constituents that they represent, they don't see power? The power you hold is how greater or how much greater you enhance and enrich the lives of the people that you represent. That's the power. And so statistics show that there are a number of people, especially the so-called triple Trumpers, those voters who have voted for the 34 count convicted felon 3 times. They'll follow him into the pits of hell. And they'll be glad they were invited just to be whatever they believe is important in his space. But there is a certain amount, I would hope, there's a certain amount that, and I want to be careful when I say it, but there's a certain amount of blind cult-like loyalty that people should not entertain. There's just a certain amount of it. You can't go but so far when it is damaging and detrimental to you and the people that you love. And so that's what I hope, that for those people who will just follow him over the edge, okay, it is what it is. We tried to tell you all of that. But for everyone else, let's learn that lesson. It's okay to vote for someone who's not in your party as long as they are going to represent your best interests. And certainly if they don't, then your power is your vote, and you can then pull them back out. But when someone is representing your best interest, when you realize that, yes, I am wealthy and I can share that wealth with others, because when someone else is doing better, by default, we all are doing better. When that becomes the forefront, then we might have learned a lesson collectively and individually, but certainly in a nation that needs to totally pivot from the direction that we're in now. That being said, thank you for tuning into this episode of the podcast, Evidently You're Unaware. I am your host, Andrea. And I just want to close with this. I'm a statistics girl, so sometimes I always will close with some, but let me talk about deficits so that we all understand this cycle and how much it is costing us. And we all know what's happening in this current climate that we're in. Gas prices, eggs are still up, yes, and the like. But let me talk about this number. As of mid-March 2026, the total U.S. national debt has surpassed $39 trillion with a T. Trillion with a T. Let's learn the lesson. In the lane of optimism, and I'm going to stay in that lane, I hope voters will have the chance this cycle. I do hope voters will have the chance this cycle in the upcoming November midterms of 2026 to start the brakes to be put in place on this habitual harm, this cycle that we're going on. We're in a midterms. I hope we have the opportunity. I'm not sure, but I do hope that we do. And if we do, I pray that they will stay, they, all of us will stay on that cycle and continue saying no and pushing back and voting in, even if it means you've got to do something you've not done ever. And that means vote for somebody that's not representative of the letter of your party affiliation. But if it means that it helps the country move forward, let's do the right thing. And so November 2028, midterms 2030, general election again 2032. Though that's what I mean by the cycle. Whoever becomes the president in 2028 is going to need to do kind of what Barack did behind Bush number 2, what Bill Clinton did behind Bush number 1, what will have to happen behind the 34 count convicted felon's second administration. It's going to take a minute. And I hope that we give that president and his cabinet the opportunity, beyond words and beyond pressure and beyond hurry up and fix it, because as we watched right now it being torn down, it is going to take time. We got to weed out those who have helped create what we see today, and that will take some time, but we can break that cycle and we can do it, I believe, together. So thank you again. If you've not done so, please subscribe to my channel. You see my handles there. Inbox me if you have comments about this episode, Andrea@strategicblueprint.info. Follow me on YouTube. Subscribe and follow me. If you are not yet a subscriber and your notifications aren't on, do turn them on. YouTube at Evidently You're Unaware. Follow me on Blue Sky at thesuccessfuldiva.bsky.social, and follow me on TikTok at EYU Podcast. Thank you and God bless.